The ballot that you're going to get has two questions in it. The first question is really straightforward. If we are, how should British Columbians elect their legislature? Do we want to stick with our current first-past-the-post system or switch to a system of proportional representation? Not very complicated. The second question asks, if on question one, British Columbians choose to change, here are three options for proportional representation, and it asks you to rank your choices. Now, importantly, you don't have to answer the second question, right? If you don't have an opinion on this, that's fine. You can only answer question one, and your ballot's not spoiled. Conversely, if you vote in question one to keep first past the post, you're still allowed to have an opinion and rank. You might have preferences in the event of change. Here's a nice slide from the Fair Vote people of what that ballot looks like if it was about dessert. So the first question would say, what kind of dessert would you like? Something from the old country like spotted dick, or something popular all over the world like ice cream. And if switching to ice cream, rank your favorite choices. I don't think it's that complicated. All right. Of these three options, how do they actually work? I'm going to walk you through the three options now. So the first one is called dual member. And under dual member, neighboring pairs of ridings would be merged into two-member ridings, other than large rural ridings, which would be left as they are. The parties in those dual-member ridings would nominate teams of two people, their first candidate and their second candidate. And people would vote not just for the single candidate, but for the team. The first seat goes to the candidate of the party who won the most votes in that riding, just like now. It's basically exactly like now. But the second seat would be allocated based on the overall provincial popular vote. So it works something like this. The first seats are all allocated like they are now, and then the system says, okay, well, given the popular vote, the Liberals need X more seats, the NDP need Y more seats, the Greens need Z more seats, etc. And then they go back and they look at where the candidates from those parties had the strongest number of votes, and they get the second seats. Your ballot under this system is actually the simplest. It would look something like this, so it's basically like it does now, except you've got two candidates from the parties instead of a single one. And independents can, of course, also run. And if an independent comes first or second in this system, they get one of the seats.
So how would two votes for independent?
So you don't vote twice. You just vote the once for whichever one that you want. And then, so if the purple party got the most votes in this riding, their candidate A gets the first seat. But the second seat gets allocated the way I just described. You're going to look at the overall provincial vote, and they're going to say, okay, each of the parties need this amount more seats. Where did those parties perform the strongest? They get the second seat. So mostly you would have two seats where the people would come from different ridings, although in some cases they would be different parties, but in some cases they'd be from the same party. The second system is the mixed member system. It's called mixed because we elect MLAs in two ways. About 60% of the ridings, we would elect, of the seats, excuse me, we would elect MLAs just like we do now in first past the post. But the ridings would be somewhat larger. They would be about 2/3 larger in size. And if you want a helpful way to think about it, it would mean that they would become more or less the same size as they are federally. Okay? But for the other 40% of the seats, they would be elected from regional party lists. So the parties would, for the different regions, have their list of candidates. And again, the system would draw from those regional lists in order to produce a legislature that is proportional to the popular vote. And so your ballot would look something like this. You'd have two votes. One vote, just like you do now, for your preferred candidate for the local riding. But your second vote would be for the party, and it remains to be determined, this was one area where the Attorney General said we'll decide afterwards, whether or not you would just vote for your preferred party, A, B, C, or D, or you might also have the choice of saying within each of those party lists, this is the person I most prefer. So the second option would further empower the voter. No, you vote twice. You have 2 votes in this model, okay? The third system is called rural-urban, and it combines 2 different PR systems. Rural areas would elect their MLAs using mixed member, which is the system I just showed you. But for the majority of us who live in urban or suburban settings, we would vote using STV, or the single transferable vote, which is the same system that the Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform recommended back in the 2000s, and that we voted on in the referendums in 2005 and in 2009. And so in those urban ridings under STV, the ridings would become larger, so they would each elect between 4 and 7 MLAs. So imagine, for example, in Vancouver, where right now there's 11 or 12 ridings and MLAs, Vancouver would probably get amalgamated into 2 or 3 ridings, but each of those ridings would have between 4 and 7 MLAs. Notably, one of the things that I think is quite clever about this option, I think STV had a lot going for it. I voted for it the last 2 elections. But one of the legit critiques of STV is that it didn't work that great in rural BC because the ridings would become too large, right? For us in Vancouver, if the ridings become 4 times larger, you know, it's 10 minutes on the bus. But if you're in a large rural riding, the idea of a riding becoming 4 times larger is huge. And so this system fixes that. It says the majority of us will use STV, but in those large rural ridings, they'll use MMP, mixed member, and so instead of having to become 4 times larger, those ridings would just become about 2/3 larger, or basically equivalent to the ridings they already have federally, okay? For those of us in an urban setting, our STV ballots would look something like this. So let's say there's 4 candidates. The parties would have, this is actually, would have 4 candidates, not 3. And you, as the voter, get to rank as many or as few of them as you want. Now, one of the attractions of this model is, this is the model that most empowers the individual voter, right? Because first of all, the parties have their slates, but you get to decide which of the people you most like, and you can mix it up. You can say, I really like this person from Party A, but my second choice is this person from Party C. This is also the system in which independents stand the best chance of winning, because under ridings with 4 to 7 MLAs, a candidate really needs to secure somewhere between 15 and 25% of the vote to win one of those seats. And so if an independent without a party brand, but with a decent-sized base, they actually stand a decent chance of winning under this system. Every MLA would still be accountable to a local riding in this system. And one of the main arguments I would make about this, but actually all of the systems that I've just shown you, because again, the no side likes to say, you know, we'll lose local representation. I actually think this is better for local representation, because not only will everyone still have a local riding MLA under all of these systems, so you will have geographic proximity, but you will also have political affinity nearby. You will have a nearby MLA who shares your worldview in some way. Unlike the map I showed you before, where if you're a liberal in the interior, you're frozen out of cabinet, but if you're a New Democrat or leaning person in the interior, you're looking at a day-long drive to find an MLA with whom you share your political values. Similarly, if you're a liberal on Vancouver Island, you're in a similar predicament. Here's some things that are true for all 3 of the options I've just shown you. First of all, I would contend they're all a huge improvement over what we have now. They all produce proportional outcomes reflecting how we actually vote. As I was just saying, I think they not only preserve but actually enhance local representation. They would all improve the diversity of the legislature. They all are set up in a way to ensure that no region will have fewer MLAs than they currently do. So that there too, the mixed member system, Dave Eby did something I think a little creative. So mixed member exists in New Zealand, it exists in Germany, but usually the list MLAs are for the whole country or the whole province. But Eby said, well, in this case, even the list MLAs will be regionally based. And in that way, he was able to ensure that no region will have fewer MLAs than they currently have. I think for that reason, they're all innovative made in BC models that reflect our unique needs and geography. None will significantly increase the size of the legislature, so the regulations cap that at 8 additional seats. They all include a minimum threshold of 5%, so a party has to get 5% to get a seat, so extreme fringe parties can't get a seat. And there's, if you're still not feeling sure, a little uncertain, the Attorney General has built in this sort of fail-safe road test, if you will, a little escape clause, which is that in the regulations, they have committed to a second confirmation referendum after 2 election cycles. I think that's important because so much of the debate about this remains theoretical. You know, we know what we know until we know something different, experience something different. And so now we get to try it out. And after 2 election cycles, we'll have another referendum. And if people don't like it, they can switch back. But by the way, I'm not aware of a country that has ever chosen to switch back. Just saying. In fact, 85% of developed countries already use some form of proportional representation, and yet we're somehow told it's too complicated. I don't think British Columbians are somehow stupider than these good people. But given that most democracies use PR, it's fairly easy for people on the no side to cherry pick examples and to point to some individual country experiencing some problem or challenge and pin it on the electoral system rather than any number of other variables or factors at play. To that point about, you know, this fear-mongering that we hear, that if we switch to PR, it'll enable far-right extremist parties. I showed you the evidence off the top around the US and India now and so on. Like, no electoral system has a monopoly on either preventing or fostering far-right parties. And if you claim one way or the other, you're cherry-picking the examples. But more to the point, well, if you look back at the history of the last 100 years, where we've seen the emergence of Nazi or neo-Nazi or far-right parties, it's not about the electoral system. It's about the economic policies in many cases. You know, in Greece with this Golden Dawn neo-Nazi party, it's about the punishing austerity that's been imposed by the debt holders. In some cases, there's clearly distressing stuff happening in some of the electoral results in Europe. Europe is dealing with the largest refugee crisis since the Second World War. And layered onto that, years of austerity and rising inequality, and it creates the same toxic stew that Trump tapped into. In fact, many of those far-right parties in Europe are emboldened and inspired by the Trump victory under first past the post. Last week, I was debating Susanna Anton at the Surrey Board of Trade. She opened with the Swedish election results, saying, you know, the far right in Sweden just won 17% of the vote. They hold the balance of power, she said. Well, hang on. We don't know that. Well, we'll see if they hold the balance of power. We don't know that yet. But if you look at the Netherlands, where the far right also secured 17% of the vote, the only influence they've had is that they've managed to get every other political party to cooperate to keep them isolated. That's the influence that they've had. But more to the point, you know, is there a disturbing anti-immigrant racist backlash at play in Sweden? Yes, there is. But think about this, you know. We had a raging debate in Canada about whether or not we would take 25,000 Syrian refugees. Sweden, with a population less than a third of Canada's, has taken 300,000 refugees since 2015. I don't think we're in a very good position to offer morality lessons about tolerance to them. So, what can we do to win? First of all, people need to know there's a referendum and they need to get out and vote, and we need to get out the vote. I think at the end of the day, this is about talking to our friends and our families and our coworkers, sending a personal email to everyone in our networks saying, there's the referendum is coming, I'm voting yes, here's why, and encourage people to do the same. Host or give a talk. I'm happy to actually share this PowerPoint with anyone who wants it to make their own. Write letters to the editor, call into the radio. There's a ton of fabulous stuff on shareables now on social media. That you can donate to the Yes campaign, volunteer at Canvas or phone, join some of the phone bank efforts. These are all groups that are active on this file now. So Vote PR-BC is the official proponent group, and they're looking for volunteers. I have printouts of the slides in the back, so you can grab those links there to signing up. Excuse me, Lead Now is also looking for volunteers. Fair Vote BC is looking for volunteers. And that's the special webpage that we've created where all the stuff we've produced on PR is handily available at one site. In conclusion, ProRep incentivizes parties to make decisions together, gathering the input and expertise of one another to build long-lasting policies to urgent problems that cannot simply be rolled back for partisan purposes, because they are designed with the majority in mind. I believe we deserve a democracy where we get to vote for the representatives we want and not strategically against those we most fear. We deserve to be liberated to vote our values and to feel safe knowing that our votes weren't wasted. And under ProRep, that will be the new normal. And for those who worry about PR enabling the far right or producing too much uncertainty, I would simply say, trust the values of British Columbians. Their values are on the whole good and progressive and caring. Those values are not going to change overnight with the change in the electoral system. ProRep is going to be a transformative change. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I am convinced that when we liberate people to vote their values in British Columbia, that the outcome is going to serve us well. Thanks.